Dear listeners, imagine this. Inside a luxurious cafe in the heart of the city, a young man in worn-out clothes sits alone in the corner. In his hand, only a glass of iced coffee, but in his eyes, a storm of silence and sorrow. Suddenly, a well-dressed manager walks up to him. His voice sharp, cutting through the air, scolding and humiliating him in front of everyone. No one knew that this simple-looking young man was not just any ordinary customer, and that one cruel remark would mark the beginning of the manager's downfall. What really happened behind that one cup of coffee? But before we continue the story, please support this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support truly means a lot and keeps us motivated to bring more powerful stories your way. And of course, a huge thank you to everyone who has already shown love with likes, shares, comments, and subscriptions. You're an essential part of this storytelling journey. Now let's dive into the story. That morning, the sun had just risen. The sky was still veiled in a light fog, and the streets were quiet. On the corner of Hazia Masiri Street stood a modern cafe called Sandana Bistro. A sleek glass-fronted building with minimalist decor, a favorite spot for office workers and the upscale youth. The glass door opened slowly. A young man stepped inside, his movements quiet, as if he didn't want to attract attention. His name was Raka. His face was clean, but his clothes were simple. A faded gray t-shirt and old jeans. No fancy bag. No shining shoes. Raka walked straight to the cashier. Softly he said, "One iced coffee, please." "To go. But may I sit for a while?" Cashier nodded. Raka paid in cash and sat quietly in a corner. He looked out the window, his gaze distant. He occasionally swiped at his phone screen, but mostly he sat in silence, as if carrying a weight too heavy to explain, or a pain too deep to show. From across the room, a tall man in a sleek black blazer was watching him. This was Baimo, the new manager of Sandana Bistro. Around 35, sharply dressed, known for being efficient and arrogant. He judged people quickly, especially by how they looked. He whispered to one of the servers, "Customers like that, coming in just to buy one drink and hog the seat. Look at his clothes. Embarrassing. If everyone were like him, we'd go out of business." The server looked down, uncomfortable. But Baimo didn't stop. He walked over to Raka's table. Loud enough for others to hear, he said, "Sir, sorry, but this place isn't for people who just want to sit around using free Wi-Fi after buying one drink. If you can't afford to order properly, you probably shouldn't stay too long." The cafe went silent. A woman sipping her latte turned her head. Two students typing on laptops glanced over. Everyone stared at Raka. He remained quiet. His eyes shifted. Not angry, but wounded. He took a sip of his drink and looked up at Baimo. "Sorry, sir. I thought paying customers had a right to sit, regardless of how they're dressed." Baimo let out a mocking laugh. "Well, I'm just trying to maintain the standard here. We don't want other guests feeling uncomfortable. If you want to stay long, at least order more." Raka stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply said, "Thank you, Mr. Manager. I hope you're blessed with more and more success." Then he walked out the door. 2 days later, the atmosphere in Sandana Bistro shifted. Word spread that the owner of the cafe would be visiting. Mr. Hendra, the founder, was rarely seen. He was over 60, respected in the city's food industry, and known for being both wise and quiet. Even more surprising, it was said that he would bring his son, who had just returned from abroad. Baimo was ecstatic. He ordered the entire cafe cleaned from top to bottom. The sofas were covered with new fabric. The walls were sprayed with expensive fragrance. He even hired a professional photographer. That morning, Baimo stood tall in front of the cafe, wearing his best suit and strongest cologne. He believed this would be his day, the day the owner would finally recognize his leadership and reward his efforts. But what he didn't know, this wasn't a day for praise. It was a day of reckoning, a day when a bruised heart would return, and when one glass of iced coffee would reveal the most bitter truth of all. Morning light spilled softly through the tall windows of Sandana Bistro, but the tension in the air was heavier than usual. Staff members whispered nervously behind the counter. Plates were aligned with surgical precision. Chairs were wiped for the third time. Every small detail had to be perfect. Today was not just any day. Today, Mr. Hendra, the founder and silent power behind the cafe empire, was expected to arrive. For years, Mr. Hendra had rarely shown his face. He trusted his management team to run the business. But the news of his visit had shaken everyone, especially Baimo, the proud manager who had built a name on elegance and control. He stood near the entrance, adjusting his tie every few minutes, making sure his shoes reflected the ceiling lights. His eyes darted toward the door every time someone passed by. Inside, his thoughts raced. This could be his moment, the promotion he had been waiting for. Maybe even a chance to run the upcoming flagship branch in Jakarta. Then, at exactly 11 in the morning, a black luxury sedan pulled up in front of the cafe. Every head turned. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door. Out came a tall man in his 60s, dressed in a simple yet elegant batik shirt. His hair was graying at the temples, but his steps were steady. His name carried weight in the city's business circles. Mr. Hendra. But beside him was someone else. A young man in a white shirt and dark jeans. Simple clothing. Quiet presence. But his face. Baimo froze. It was Raka. The same young man he had humiliated just 2 days ago. The same one he called cheap and unworthy. Raka walked in calmly, his expression unreadable. He didn't even glance at Baimo, who stood stiff like a statue, trying to hide his panic behind a plastic smile. Mr. Hendra shook a few hands, greeting the staff warmly. Then, with a firm voice, he said, "Everyone, I want you to meet someone special. This is Raka, my only son. He's been away for a few years, learning quietly. And starting today, he'll be involved in all of our cafe operations, starting right here." The words hit Baimo like a brick to the chest. He tried to smile, but his face twitched slightly. Raka was now his superior. Mr. Hendra turned to Raka and said, "You can sit anywhere you like, Nak. This cafe will soon be yours to manage." Baimo stepped forward, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Hendra, I didn't know he was your son. If I had known, I would have." Mr. Hendra raised a hand. "You would have what, Baimo? Treated him better. Greeted him with respect." Baimo nodded quickly, wiping sweat from his temple. Mr. Hendra's voice was calm but sharp. "That's the problem. You see people based on what they wear, not who they are. That's not how I built this business." Silence filled the room. Customers had paused their conversations. Staff members stopped moving. All ears were on them. Baimo tried to speak again, but the weight of his mistake hung over him like a dark cloud. Raka finally turned toward him. His voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any shout. "2 days ago you didn't ask my name. You didn't ask why I was here. You only saw my clothes and assumed everything else. How many others have you done that to?" Baimo's eyes dropped to the floor. He had no answer. Mr. Hendra let out a breath. I've heard enough. Baimo, take the rest of the day off. Starting tomorrow, Rocco will be evaluating how things are run here. I suggest you reflect deeply. Without waiting for a reply, he walked toward a seat by the window. Rocco followed him silently, his hands tucked in his pockets. Baimo stood alone, surrounded by whispers and silent judgment. His pride had been peeled away in front of everyone. But more than that, he realized he had misjudged not just a customer, but the future owner of everything he worked for. Later that afternoon, the cafe returned to normal, or at least it tried to. Rocco sat quietly with his father, sipping the same iced coffee he had ordered days ago. But this time, no one dared approach with insults. No one questioned his presence. From the corner of the room, a server approached him nervously. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened before. I didn't say anything when Mr. Baimo talked like that. I was afraid. Rocco looked at her and smiled gently. It's okay. Fear makes people silent. But kindness makes them brave. She nodded, eyes glistening. Then she returned to her work, a bit taller, a bit lighter. Meanwhile, Baimo sat alone in the break room, replaying everything in his head. The harsh words, the looks, the silence, and above all, the face of the young man he had judged so easily, now sitting where Baimo had once sat as king. But the fall from pride was not over yet, because what awaited him tomorrow would decide whether he could stay or go. Since early morning, Baimo had arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. His face was weary, his eyes swollen. He sat alone in the staff room, long before opening hours. His hands trembled as he held a cup of coffee. The aroma, which used to calm him, now only tightened the grip of guilt in his chest. He felt like a stranger in the place he once ruled. Every corner of the cafe seemed to judge him. The silent walls echoed back the harsh words he had spoken to customers. The neatly arranged chairs reminded him of all the people he had belittled. At 8 a.m., the back door opened quietly. Rocco walked in, holding a folder filled with documents and operational data. He calmly took a seat at the manager's desk, the very desk that once belonged to Baimo. The staff watched from a distance. They no longer saw him as just a quiet customer. They were beginning to realize there was something deeper in his silence. His eyes were sharp, yet never cruel. Rocco called each staff member one by one to speak privately. Not to interrogate them, but to listen. He wanted to know what it was like to work under Baimo. What made them comfortable? What made them feel unsafe? Some were nervous at first, but within minutes, they began to open up. Rocco didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He simply listened. Baimo watched from a distance. One by one, staff members exited Rocco's room with lighter expressions. But inside him, fear grew stronger. He knew what they had said. He knew who he had been. He wasn't blind. He had just been too proud to see. As noon approached, the cafe's busiest time, Rocco gathered all the staff in a small meeting room that was rarely used. He stood before them. Baimo sat in the back row, blending in with the crowd. Rocco opened his folder and began to speak. I've listened to each of you, and I want to thank you for being honest. His voice was calm, but every word struck deep. There's a lot we need to fix. Not just in our systems but in how we treat people. He looked around the room. Some of you have felt unappreciated. Some of you wanted to quit but stayed only because you had no other choice. And all of that didn't happen because the work was too hard, but because of how you were treated. Baimo's breath caught in his chest. He knew this was about him. Rocca paused and sighed. I'm not here to judge anyone. But change has to start. We can't build this business on fear and mistreatment. We need warmth, not just fast service. We need empathy, not just commands. All eyes were on Rocca. No one said a word. Only the sound of shallow breaths filled the room. This won't be easy. But I'm here to listen, to learn together, and if needed, to forgive. Rocca slowly shifted his gaze to one spot. His eyes met Baimo's. Baimo looked down. His heart felt crushed. He couldn't take it anymore. He stood from his seat, walked to the front of the room, and stopped right in front of Rocca. I was wrong, he said, his voice barely steady. The room went silent. I let arrogance blind me. I thought as long as targets were met, everything was fine. But I didn't realize I was hurting people. Including you. He looked up, eyes red with shame. I'm sorry. Rocca looked at him deeply, then replied gently. Change doesn't start with words. It starts with actions. Baimo nodded slowly. He didn't ask for his position back. He didn't try to defend himself. He only wanted one thing, the chance to make things right. In the following days, change came slowly but steadily. Rocca didn't fire Baimo. Instead, he invited Baimo to start from the bottom. Baimo wore the same uniform as the regular staff. He took orders, wiped tables, and listened to customers directly. First, some employees found it strange. But gradually they began to believe. Maybe people really could change. One day, during a busy lunch hour, an elderly woman entered the cafe alone. Her clothes were worn. Her steps slow. She sat in the far corner. Baimo, who was cleaning a nearby table, noticed her. Without hesitation, he approached. Welcome, ma'am. Would you like me to find you a more comfortable spot? The old woman looked at him slowly, then gave a faint smile. My son, I was once ignored in this place. But today I was served with dignity. Baimo smiled, his eyes misty. I'm sorry, ma'am. Thank you for coming back. Rocca watched from afar. He said nothing. But in his heart he knew. Sometimes wounds are mirrors. And mirrors help people finally see who they truly are. Change had begun. But the storm was not over yet. Because behind every visible effort, there was still one secret left unrevealed. Something that could shake the very foundation of this business. The cafe began to feel different. The once cold and stiff atmosphere slowly turned warmer. Staff started smiling more, not out of fear or habit, but because they finally felt safe. Customers noticed it too. Regulars who once only came for the coffee now stayed longer, chatting with waiters, enjoying the calm. Rocca quietly oversaw everything. He didn't micromanage. He trusted. He corrected gently when needed, and praised even the smallest efforts. Slowly, the team began to mirror his way. Even Baimo, once proud and harsh, became quieter and more thoughtful. His gestures more careful, his voice softer. But something was still bothering Rocca. He had gone through almost every document since he took over. Inventory sheets, sales logs, staff evaluations. Everything looked neat on the surface. Too neat. Especially the numbers. One late night, after the cafe had closed, Rocca stayed behind. He sat alone at the manager's desk, surrounded by paper files and his laptop. He opened the digital archives. Clicked through old invoices. Something didn't add up. There were purchases listed under suppliers he didn't recognize. Bulk orders that had no corresponding inventory usage. Payments that had been approved by Baimo. His heart started pounding. He pulled out the hard copy ledgers. cross-referenced them with the bank statements. There it was again. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, repeated every few weeks, all hidden behind vague descriptions like miscellaneous or kitchen restock. It was theft, but not just a one-time mistake. It was systematic, planned. Rocca leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes. His chest tightened. Baimo. Could it really be him? Didn't make sense. Baimo had been changing. He had humbled himself. He worked the floors, served customers with respect, apologized without being asked. Could someone so remorseful also be a thief? The next morning, Rocca didn't confront him. He needed more than suspicion. He needed to understand the truth. So he met with Adit, one of the senior baristas, who had been with the cafe since the beginning. In a quiet corner, away from others, Rocca spoke in a low voice. Adit, during your time here, did you ever notice anything strange about our purchases? Or maybe deliveries that didn't match our needs? Adit paused. His expression shifted. He lowered his voice. There were a few times I thought it was weird. Boxes came in but we didn't use half of what was in them. Sometimes they disappeared fast, but I thought maybe it was used in a special order or sent to another branch. Baimo used to handle all of that. Rocca nodded slowly. Did anyone ever question it? Adit shook his head. Most people were too scared. He was different back then. Rocca looked out toward the cafe. Baimo was behind the counter, wiping glasses. Focused. But the past had its weight. Later that afternoon, Rocca called Baimo into the office. Baimo entered slowly, like a man expecting to be let go. Rocca gestured for him to sit. He laid out 2 files on the desk. I need to ask you something. I found discrepancies in the financial reports. Orders that didn't match usage. Payments to unknown vendors. All signed under your name. Baimo didn't speak. His eyes flicked to the papers, then down to the floor. It wasn't a mistake, was it? Baimo inhaled sharply, then nodded once. I was drowning, he whispered. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. I told myself it was temporary, that I deserved it after all the stress. But then it became routine. His voice cracked. I never planned for it to go that far. And when I saw you, when I found out who you really were, I knew everything would fall apart. Rocca didn't respond immediately. The silence was heavy. I trusted you, Baimo. I know. You could have come clean. I was going to. I just didn't know when. Rocca leaned forward. Now is the time. Baimo looked up. His face pale, hands shaking. I'll return everything. I'll sign whatever you need. You can fire me. Please don't let the others suffer for my mistakes. Rocca stood, walked to the window and stared outside. He spoke without turning. This place is more than just a business. It's a place of healing. And sometimes, healing means tearing off the last bandage. He turned back to Baimo. You're not fired. Not yet. Baimo blinked, stunned. But you will report this to the board. You will explain everything. Not me. You. Baimo nodded, tears forming in his eyes. That night, as the cafe lights dimmed and the last customers left, Baimo sat alone at the back table, writing his confession. Every word was an unraveling. Every sentence a piece of the burden lifted. Rocca watched from afar, the weight in his own heart still heavy. Because even though the truth was finally out, he knew. The most painful secret was yet to come. And it wasn't about money. It was about blood. About legacy. About betrayal that went far beyond numbers on a page. Rain fell steadily that evening, soaking the empty streets outside the cafe. The soft tapping on the windows gave the quiet room a rhythm of its own. Inside, only two people remained. Rocca, sitting silently behind the counter, and Bimo, still at the far corner with his confession in hand. The mood was somber. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had been stirring for days within Rocca's heart. He had told himself he was ready. Ready to lead. Ready to forgive. Ready to bring change. But he hadn't told himself the one thing that had been echoing in the back of his mind since he stepped foot in the cafe as just another customer weeks ago. He hadn't told himself that this place, this business, was not only tied to his name. It was tied to a past he had run from, to a man he once called father, and to a wound that had never truly healed. That night, as Bimo quietly left the cafe, head bowed, Rocca sat down in the dim light and reached under the counter. He pulled out an old black notebook, faded leather almost falling apart at the edges. It wasn't part of the cafe's regular financial records. It was his father's personal journal. The one thing he had managed to keep when he left home years ago. He opened it slowly. Each page was filled with neat handwriting. Notes about daily operations. Ideas for new menu items. Praise for the employees. Worries about cost. And scattered in between were fragments of something more personal. Bimo shows great promise. But his ego. I worry it will be his downfall. Rocca doesn't want anything to do with this place. But I hope someday he'll understand why I built it. I'm getting tired. This place is more than just work. It's my breath. My second heart. I don't want it to die with me. Rocca closed the journal. His fingers lingered on the leather cover. His jaw tightened. He remembered the day he left. He had just turned 22. A quiet argument at first. Then louder. And louder. His father's voice filled with desperation. Rocca's filled with bitterness. You care more about your business than your family, he had shouted. I built this for you, his father had replied. I don't want it. And with those words, Rocca had walked out. No goodbye. No hug. Just the sound of the door slamming behind him. His father died a year later. A sudden heart attack. And Rocca never got the chance to say anything more. Now, years later, he sat in the very cafe his father had built, trying to hold together the pieces of something he once rejected. And the very man his father had warned about, Bimo, had nearly destroyed it. But the irony was bitter. Bimo, for all his faults, had stayed. Rocca had left. That thought haunted him. The next morning, the staff noticed a change in Rocca. He spoke less, moved more slowly, not out of anger, but as if his heart was weighed down by something unseen. He called Adit and a few other senior staff into a closed meeting. There's something I haven't told you all, Rocca began, his voice low. And I think it's time you knew. He placed his father's journal on the table. This cafe wasn't just passed down to me like a company. It was built by my father. And I'm his only child. Gasps filled the room. Adit leaned forward, stunned. I thought you were just another investor, one of them whispered. Rocca shook his head. No, I'm Rocca Hermawan, son of Adifir Hermawan, the founder of this place. Silence stretched long. Eyes stared at him in disbelief, some in shame for having underestimated him. I left this place years ago. I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't understand why my father gave everything to this cafe. I thought he was choosing it over our family. His voice broke slightly. But now, I see it differently. This cafe wasn't a wall between us. It was his way of building something lasting. Something for me. And I rejected it. He paused. I can't undo the past. But I'm here now. And I need all of you to help me rebuild what he started. They nodded slowly. Even those who had doubted him now saw the truth. Rocca wasn't just here to manage. He was here to restore something sacred. That afternoon, Baimo returned. He walked in through the back door, shoulders slumped, expecting cold stares or silent judgment. But the staff didn't turn away. They greeted him quietly. Some even smiled a little. Forgiveness was beginning to take root. Rocca waited at the bar. When Baimo approached, he held out a piece of paper. Not a termination letter, but a list of local community kitchens, charities, and schools that needed help. You're not going to prison, Rocca said flatly. But you will give back. Every month. Until what you took has been repaid. And not just with money but with your time. Your hands. Your effort. Baimo nodded, eyes lowered. You're also going to teach the new recruits. You'll train them on how not to become who you were. Baimo looked up surprised. You still trust me with them? Rocca didn't smile. But his voice softened. I trust you with your second chance. That night the rain returned. Rocca stood outside, watching the lights from the cafe glow through the mist. Inside the staff moved with ease. Laughter floated through the air. The sound of cups clinking, chairs shifting, quiet conversation. It was the sound of healing. Then a voice broke the quiet. You remind me of your father. Rocca turned. It was a woman. Mid-50s. Modest dress. Her face kind but firm. You knew him? Rocca asked. She nodded. I was the first person he hired when he opened this place. He once told me, if my son ever comes back, tell him. I never stopped waiting. Rocca's chest tightened. He said that. The woman nodded again. Her eyes moist. I'm glad you came back. He would have been proud. Rocca said nothing. He simply looked up at the cafe sign, the one bearing his father's name, now flickering gently under the rain. But just as the peace began to settle, a call came in from the cafe's accountant. Sir, there's something wrong with the inheritance files. Someone else made a claim to this property before your name was registered. Woman, using your father's last name. And her child is claiming to be his heir. Rocca froze. Another heir. Another child. The storm had not passed. It had only just begun. The voice on the phone still echoed in Rocca's ears long after the call had ended. The wind outside the cafe had calmed, but inside him a tempest began to churn. He stood in the empty kitchen, the familiar aroma of roasted beans no longer comforting. His father, the man he thought he had finally begun to understand, had left behind a name, a reputation, business, and now, a secret. Rocca had returned to claim his father's legacy, but someone else had laid claim first. Not an investor, not an old friend, but a woman, and her child. His heart pounded with questions that felt too heavy to ask. Who was she? Where did she come from? Was she telling the truth? Was his father really the man he thought he was? The next morning, Rocca sat in his office, face pale, staring at the documents forwarded by the accountant. The woman's name was Larasati, and the child's name, Adnan Hermawan, boy, 17 years old. Unan, a name that sounded too close, too familiar. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the printed affidavit. According to the document, Larasati claimed to have had a long-term relationship with Adifir Hermawan, Rocca's father, which allegedly began before Rocca's mother passed away. Rocca clenched his jaw. His memories of childhood were filled with his father's work, his obsession with the cafe, and his mother's long sighs as she looked out the window waiting for someone who never really came home. Could it be true? Was that why his father was always late? Was that why their dinners grew silent, and his mother's eyes slowly lost their light? He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to throw the paper away and forget the name. But it was too late. The claim was legal. The woman had submitted enough proof to open a formal investigation into the will. And if proven, Adnan could take up to half the ownership of the cafe. The thought made Rocca feel like a stranger in his own bloodline. The first meeting between Rocca and Larasati happened quietly at a notary office. The room was sterile, white walls and glass panels that reflected the tension between them. Larasati wore a simple blouse, her face thin and quiet, her eyes avoiding direct contact. Adnan sat beside her, dressed plainly, his features sharp and disturbingly similar to Rocca's at that age. They studied each other like two parts of a mirror, fractured by time and truth. "You must be Rocca," Larasati said softly. "And you're the woman who tore my family apart," Rocca replied coldly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She did not deny it. "I never wanted to ruin anything. I never asked for this. But here you are. I'm only doing what's right for my son." "Right," Rocca scoffed. "You waited until my father was gone. Then you came for what was never yours." Adnan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "He was my father too," the boy murmured. Rocca turned to him. "Is that what he told you?" Adnan nodded. "He used to visit us. He brought me books, music, said he was always busy. I didn't know he had another family." Rocca narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe you didn't want to know." Larasati suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. "You think I'm proud of this? That I wanted to raise a child in the shadows? I begged him to be honest. I begged him to tell you. But he was a coward. He was afraid to lose what little he had left." Rocca felt the heat rise in his chest. He had everything. Home, a wife, a son. And you were the lie he chose. Larasati stood. "No. I was the reality he ran to when the weight of your world became too much." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the notary lowered his gaze, unsure whether to interfere. Rocca stood as well. "I don't care what you think you're owed. I've poured everything into this cafe. I'm the one rebuilding it. Not him. Not you." Adnan looked up, eyes clear. "Then let me help you." Rocca froze. "What?" "If you really care about this place, let me work there. I don't want your money. I want to understand the man he was. The one who raised you. The one who only visited me." Larasati placed a hand on her son's arm. "You don't have to do that." But Adnan had already made up his mind. "I want to. I need to." That evening back at the cafe, Rocca stood in the middle of the empty main hall. He stared at the chairs, the cups, the counter his father once stood behind. And then he looked at the door. Adnan walked in. No ceremony. No fanfare. Just a 17-year-old boy with his father's eyes and a past too complicated to explain. The staff watched nervously. Was this another drama? Another fight? But Rocca simply nodded. "Be here tomorrow. 6 sharp." Adnan smiled faintly. "Yes, sir." The next weeks were tense. Adnan started from the bottom, sweeping floors, cleaning tables, taking orders. Some customers gave him curious looks, whispers spreading. Staff didn't know whether to treat him like a stranger or a brother. But Rocca watched from a distance, silent, dark. Adnan never complained. He never played the victim. And slowly something began to shift. Customers began to warm to him. Staff began to include him in their lunch breaks. Even Adit started calling him Little Boss, half mocking, half true. One night, after a particularly busy shift, Adnan stayed late to clean up. Rocca stood beside him, handing over a towel. "You cleaned table 9 3 times, Rocca said. "I didn't want to leave a stain." Rocca smirked. "You're a Hermawan, all right." Adnan looked at him, cautious. "Does that mean you believe I'm really his son?" Rocca didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands that had once built anger, now rebuilding trust. Then he looked at Adnan. "I believe in what I see." They stood in silence. For the first time, not as enemies, but as two sons, trying to find their father in each other. Yet as they began to build that fragile bond, something sinister moved in the shadows. A stranger had been watching the cafe. A former investor of the old management. He had once tried to buy out the cafe after Adifir's death, but was denied because of missing paperwork. Now, hearing whispers of inheritance drama and a divided ownership, he saw a new opportunity. And this time he would stop at nothing. Not even betrayal. It started with a man in a dark suit standing just outside the cafe on a rainy afternoon. No umbrella. Just his sharp gaze piercing through the fogged-up window. Rocca noticed him during the lull between the lunch and evening rush. The man wasn't a customer. He didn't seem hungry. He was waiting, but not for food. That same evening, when Rocca was locking up, the man approached. "You're Rocca Hermawan?" he asked, voice smooth, practiced. Rocca nodded cautiously. "And you are?" "Someone who has a business proposal. One you may want to hear before things become complicated." The man slipped a card into Rocca's hand and left without another word. The name printed on the card chilled Rocca. Kevin Ardianto. An investor who had once tried, and failed, to acquire Hermawan Cafe after Adifir Hermawan's passing. Rocca remembered the name because his father had warned him once, long ago, about the man's methods. He doesn't invest. He invades. Rocca didn't sleep that night. The next morning, just as the staff began their prep routine, Kevin walked in. This time not alone. He came with 2 assistants and a sealed envelope. "I believe we have legal business to discuss," he said smoothly, placing the envelope on the front counter. Adit stepped forward, confused. "Boss, who is this?" Rocca didn't answer immediately. His jaw was tense. Kevin smiled wide and sharp. "Just someone who believes in potential. But I also believe in ownership. And I think there's been some confusion about who really controls this cafe." Inside the envelope were scanned documents, old agreements, signatures, a shareholding contract that had never surfaced before. 30%. Kevin claimed to own 30% of Hermawan Cafe through an early silent investment that Adifir allegedly signed before expanding to the second branch. The branch failed, the paperwork was buried, but Kevin had kept his copy. He had waited patiently. Now, with the inheritance split and the ownership still under review, Kevin was making his move. Rocca felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at the signature. It was real. His father's writing. And the date matched a time when they were desperate to expand, when money was tight and the future unclear. Kevin leaned in. "With your brother now in the picture, things are sensitive. But I can make this easy. Sell me your shares. Walk away. And I'll take care of everything." Rocca's voice came out low and cold. "This cafe is my life. I rebuilt it from dust. I bled for it." Kevin's smile didn't waver. "Everyone bleeds. Smart people know when to stop the bleeding." Rocca gathered the staff that night after hours. The room was quiet. only the soft hum of the cooler and the clink of leftover dishes being cleared. "I need to be honest with all of you," Rocca said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "There's a man claiming a large stake in the cafe. And if what he's saying is true, we may face a hostile takeover." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Only Adnan remained still, his eyes fixed on Rocca. "What do we do?" asked Fajar, one of the senior baristas. "We fight," Rocca said. "Not with violence, but with loyalty, with proof. I need all records, all receipts, anything that shows who built this place back up after it fell. Anything that shows we've been running it independently, without him. If we can prove neglect or abandonment of stake, we may have a case." It wasn't much, but it was all they had. That night, Adnan stayed behind again. He was wiping down the machines when Rocca entered the bar area with a thick folder. Their eyes met. "You knew about Kevin?" None asked. Rocca nodded. "Only the name. I didn't know the deal went through. My father hid it." "He kept a lot hidden," Adnan said quietly. Rocca sat beside him. "I didn't mean for you to be dragged into this. You've only just started figuring out your place here." Adnan's eyes didn't flinch. "Then let me fight for it." The next few weeks became a blur of documents, lawyers, and tense silences. Kevin began spreading rumors in the local business community. Stories about Rocca's inexperience, about internal conflict between brothers, about instability and lost profits. Some suppliers pulled out. Some loyal customers stopped coming. Even some staff began to quietly submit resumes elsewhere. The heart of the cafe, its warmth, its laughter, its soul, began to dim. One morning, Rocca found Adnan standing outside, shirt soaked with sweat, hands carrying crates of fresh produce. "I thought the supplier pulled out," Rocca said. Adnan grinned, panting. "He did. So I biked to the farm. Bought it myself." Rocca blinked. "That's 3 hours one way." "I know," Adnan said simply. "I grew up not knowing him. I'm not losing him again. Not like this." It was in that moment Rocca saw it. Not just resemblance. Not just blood. But fire. The same fire Adifir Hermawan had once shown when opening the cafe for the very first time. Later that week, a small miracle arrived in the form of an old notebook. It was discovered by Au, one of the dishwashers, while cleaning out the back storage. She found it behind a broken fridge, water-damaged but readable. The pages were filled with handwritten notes by Adifir. Daily logs, personal reflections, customer comments. But on one page, scrawled in red ink, was a message that changed everything. "Must terminate Kevin's share quietly. Not safe. He doesn't care about the cafe. Will repay him personally to dissolve deal." Below it a partial receipt. A bank transfer to Kevin's old account. Dated a month before Adifir's death. Rocca brought the book to their lawyer. After 3 long days of verification they had confirmation. The payment had gone through. Kevin had been paid out in full. He no longer had any legal claim. But he hadn't reported the termination. And now he was using the outdated contract to create chaos. Rocca sat at the front counter with the document in hand. Kevin walked in later that afternoon, confident and smug. "Have you made a decision?" he asked. Rocca stood. "Yes, I have." He slid the verified payment copy across the table. Kevin paled. "You forged this." "No. My father wrote it." "You were paid." The bank confirmed. "You don't own anything here." Kevin stared at the document. Then, without a word, he turned and stormed out. The silence afterward was like a breath after drowning. That night the cafe was full again. The regulars returned. The air smelled like cinnamon and coffee beans again. Laughter returned. Adnan worked the bar. Raka manned the register. Their rhythm had become natural, unspoken. Before closing, Raka passed Adnan a small envelope. Adnan opened it. Inside was a name badge. Adnan Hermawan, co-manager. Adnan looked up surprised. Are you sure? I wouldn't have survived this without you, Raka said. And besides, you've got our father's fire. Adnan's voice cracked. I don't know what he wanted me to become. But I know what I want to become now. Raka smiled. Then let's build it. Together. But even as they found peace in their new partnership, neither of them knew that one final truth, the one their father never wrote down, was still waiting. And when it arrived, it would shake everything they thought they had rebuilt. It began on a quiet Sunday morning, when the city still slept and only the soft rhythm of mop and broom echoed in the cafe. Raka arrived early, as he always did, to prepare the space before customers filled the seats. The sun had barely risen, and a gentle mist rolled across the streets outside. Inside, the smell of wet wood and old memories clung to the walls. Adnan came in shortly after, yawning, hair messy, still adjusting to his new title. Co-manager. He had earned it. But neither of them knew that their father had left one final page unread, buried behind time, behind plaster and secrets. That morning, they noticed a patch of wall near the kitchen had begun to peel. It was old, faded, forgotten. For years, it had been covered by a bulletin board full of customer notes and sketches. But the rain from the previous week had soaked through. Raka pulled the board down to repaint it. That was when he saw it, the small, uneven bump behind the plaster. Help me pry this open, he said to Adnan. They fetched tools from the storage room and began chipping at the patch. It was a time capsule. A narrow compartment, hidden within the wall, containing a single envelope. Yellowed, but sealed. On the front, in familiar handwriting, were 4 words. For my sons. Someday. Raka froze. His hand trembled as he held the letter. Adnan stood silently beside him, not daring to breathe. They sat in the back room. Cafe still quiet. No one else knew what they had found. Raka opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 5 pages long, written in ink that had slightly faded but still legible. Adifir Hermawan's words spilled out like rain after drought. My sons, if you are reading this, then I am gone. There are things I never had the courage to say when I was alive. Things I buried deep, afraid of what they might do to both of you. But I cannot die without telling you the truth. Raka, my pride. You stood by me when no one else did. You carried burdens no young man should. You saved this cafe when I had lost all hope. I watched you become stronger than I ever was. And yet I failed to give you one thing you needed most, the truth. My son, I abandoned you. Not because I didn't love you, but because I was weak. I was ashamed of the choices I made. You were born from a mistake I made in a time when I had lost my way. Your mother was a kind soul, but I could not face the damage I had done to your lives. So I ran back to the comfort of what I knew. Erased Raka. I left you behind. Years passed, and regret hollowed me out. I followed your life from afar. I knew where you were, who raised you. I even watched you walk to school once, from the corner of a busy street, hidden behind a tree. I wanted to reach out, but I was afraid. Cowardly. I thought I would break your life more than I already had. So I did the only thing I could. I wrote this letter. I hid it. I hoped that one day the two of you would find each other. That somehow fate would repair what I had destroyed. And if you are reading this together, then maybe it has. I want you both to know. My greatest sin was silence. My greatest hope is forgiveness. You are both my blood. My legacy is not this cafe. It's the bond between you. Don't let it break again. Love you. Both of you. More than I ever said. Your father. Adifir Hermawan. Rocca's hands dropped to his lap. His chest felt hollow. His eyes burned but didn't blink. The room felt too small. The air too thick. Adnan didn't speak. He took the letter from Rocca's hands gently, rereading it, tears rolling silently down his cheeks. For a long time they sat in silence. Then Adnan whispered, "I thought he didn't want me." Rocca shook his head. "He wanted you. He just didn't know how." Adnan laughed through his tears. "You know what's funny? I used to imagine him showing up on my birthday. Even when I was too old to believe in fairy tales. I'd pretend he'd walk through the door and tell me he made a mistake." Rocca looked at him. "He did. And now we know. And we can choose what comes next." That afternoon they closed the cafe early. A rare thing. They posted a note on the door. "Family emergency. Sorry for the inconvenience." But inside the family wasn't breaking, it was healing. They gathered the staff in the main room. Rocca explained everything. Not just the letter. Not just the truth. But the reason the cafe existed in the first place. To serve, Rocca said. To bring warmth, even when our own hearts feel cold. No one left. No one judged. Instead Ayu brought out tea. Fajar lit the small candle shrine they had once made in Adifir's memory. And together they read the letter again. As a family. It wasn't just about business anymore. It never had been. Weeks passed. The cafe thrived like never before. Word had spread. Not just about the quality of the drinks or the beauty of the place, but about the story behind it. The story of two brothers, separated by silence, reunited by truth. Customers came not just to eat but to feel. Rocca and Adnan introduced a new item to the menu. The Someday Brew. It was a special blend, only available on Sundays, made from the same beans their father once imported himself. Lightly roasted. Smooth. A little bitter. A little sweet. Just like life. At the counter they placed a copy of the letter, framed behind glass. Beside it a small sign. For anyone waiting for the right moment to forgive. Sometimes someday never comes, unless we make it. Late one night, when the cafe had closed and the city had gone quiet again, Rocca and Adnan sat in silence. No words. Just comfort. The bond between them had been forged not in ease, but in pain. And like all things precious, it had been earned. Adnan looked at his brother. "You think he sees us now?" Rocca smiled faintly. "He always did. He just never knew how to show it." Outside, the rain began again. Cleansing. Inside, two brothers sat in the warmth of their father's dream. No longer just his. Now it was theirs. Dear listeners, from the long and emotional journey we have experienced together, there are many valuable lessons we can take and reflect on deeply. The story of Rocca, Adnan, and their father, Adifir Hermawan, is not merely about a small cafe or a conflict between people. It is a story about inherited wounds, painful silences, and the courage to forgive, even when the heart has been broken over and over again. In life, we often fall into the trap of judgment. We judge people by their appearance, their status, or their behavior at a single moment, without knowing the burdens they carry inside. Just like the cafe manager who insulted someone for only ordering one drink, without realizing that the person he belittled was actually the child of the cafe's owner. It's an irony that strikes us all. A reminder that we often forget to appreciate, to stay humble, and to recognize that every person carries their own story. From this story we also learn that blood cannot be denied. Time may create distance, but it can never truly sever the bond. Even if regret comes too late, honesty and the courage to speak the truth can heal even the deepest wounds. This story reminds us that family is not just about who was there in the past, but about who chooses to stay and heal in the present. About those who are willing to reach out, even when they've been hurt. And above all, that every one of us deserves a second chance, whether to apologize or to forgive. However, dear listeners, please note that this story is a work of fiction, crafted to feel real. It is written with heart and purpose, meant to serve as a source of motivation, inspiration, and life reflection for all of us. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If this story touched you, inspired you, or left you with something meaningful, please leave a comment and tell us which part moved you the most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss other stories filled with emotion, wisdom, and unexpected turns. Until we meet again in the next story, dear listeners, keep your heart kind, your words gentle, and your love for family strong.